The band stopped mid-note. 200 people in Studio 6B held their breath. Johnny Carson's hand froze on his coffee mug, eyes locked on Doc Severinsen standing at the edge of the stage, trumpet in one hand, a sealed envelope in the other. The red recording light was still on. America was watching. And Doc Severinsen had just broken the one rule they'd kept for 30 years. What happened backstage stayed backstage. But tonight that rule was about to shatter on live television. Carson's face went pale. Not the practiced pale of a comedian setting up a punchline. This was real. Ed McMahon leaned forward in his chair, confused. The audience sensed something had shifted. The laughter from seconds ago evaporated into a silence so thick you could hear the hum of the stage lights. Doc took a step forward. The envelope trembled slightly in his hand. "Johnny," he said, voice steady but raw. "I know we promised. But some promises aren't meant to be kept forever. How did we get here?" 48 hours earlier, Johnny Carson had walked into Studio 6B the way he had for nearly 3 decades. Same desk. Same curtain. Same routine. But something was different that week. The crew noticed it first. Carson was quieter than usual. His jokes during rehearsal landed, but the spark behind them felt dim. He'd sit at his desk between takes, staring at a folded piece of paper he kept in his jacket pocket. Nobody asked? You didn't ask Johnny Carson personal questions. Not even Doc. Doc Severinsen had been Carson's bandleader since 1967. 15 years of music cues, inside jokes, and unspoken understanding. They communicated in glances. A raised eyebrow from Carson meant, "Stretch this segment." A nod from Doc meant, "Cut to commercial." They were partners in the most watched late-night show in America. But more than that, they were friends who never needed many words. Until that Tuesday afternoon. Carson had called Doc into his dressing room. Not the office. The dressing room. That meant it was personal. Doc found him sitting on the leather couch, tie loosened, the folded paper now open in his hands. It was a letter. Handwritten. The edges worn from being opened and refolded too many times. "My son wrote this," Carson said quietly. 3 weeks before he died. Doc's heart stopped. He knew about Rick Carson's death in 1991. A car accident. Sudden. Devastating. But he'd never heard Johnny speak about it like this. Not in private. Never on air. Carson's hands shook as he held the letter. "He told me he was proud of me. Said he understood why I worked so much. Said he forgave me for missing his baseball games." His voice cracked. "I never got to tell him I was proud of him." The silence in that dressing room was suffocating. Doc sat down next to him. No words. Just presence. After a long moment, Carson folded the letter and put it back in his pocket. "Don't tell anyone about this," Carson said. "Please." Doc nodded. "I won't." But Carson looked at him with eyes that carried 30 years of trust. "I mean it, document. This doesn't leave this room. Not the producers. Not the writers. Nobody. I promise, Johnny." Carson stood, straightened his tie, and walked out to tape the show like nothing had happened. Because that's what Johnny Carson did. He compartmentalized. He performed. He made America laugh while carrying his own grief in silence. But Doc Severinsen couldn't stop thinking about that letter. The next night, Wednesday's taping went smoothly. Carson was back to form. Monologue killed. Guests were great. Band was tight. Everything looked perfect to the audience. But Doc watched Carson between segments, and he saw it, the way Johnny's hand would drift to his jacket pocket. The way his smile would fade the second the cameras cut away. After the show, Doc found himself in the hallway outside Carson's dressing room. He didn't knock. He just stood there, holding his trumpet case, wrestling with something he couldn't name. A production assistant walked by. "You okay, Doc?" "Yeah," he lied. "Just thinking about tomorrow's music cues." But he wasn't thinking about music cues. He was thinking about a man who'd spent 3 decades making people laugh while never letting them see him grieve. He was thinking about a letter from a son to a father. He was thinking about all the things we keep locked inside because we think that's what strength looks like. Thursday came. Final taping of the week. The audience filed in, buzzing with excitement. The band warmed up. Carson sat at his desk, flipping through cue cards. Everything was routine. Except Doc had made a decision. He'd gone home the night before and found something he'd kept in a drawer for years, a letter his own father had written to him before he died. Doc had never shown it to anyone. But reading it again, he understood something. Grief shared is grief halved. And Johnny Carson had been having his grief alone for too long. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The show started normally. Carson's monologue was sharp. The audience roared. Ed McMahon's laugh echoed through the studio. Everything was going according to plan. Then came the musical segment. Doc and the band were supposed to play a upbeat swing number, something light to transition into the next guest. But when the cue came, Doc didn't start the song. Instead, he stood up, walked to the front of the bandstand, and pulled out an envelope from inside his jacket. Carson looked up from his desk, confused. This wasn't in the script. The director in the booth frantically gestured to the cameras. Stay on Doc, stay on Carson, what's happening? Johnny, Doc said, voice cutting through the studio. Can I have a moment? The audience went silent. Carson's professional mask slipped for just a second, pure, unfiltered confusion crossed his face. But he nodded. Sure, Doc, you meant. What's on your mind? Doc walked down from the bandstand onto the main stage. The cameras followed him. 200 people in the audience leaned forward. Millions at home stopped whatever they were doing. Carson stopped mid-gesture. The entire studio froze. Doc stood a few feet from Carson's desk, holding the envelope like it weighed 1,000 pounds. You and I have worked together for 15 years, he began. And in that time, you've taught me a lot. How to read a room. How to time a joke. How to make music that makes people feel something. Carson smiled, but it was uncertain. Where was this going? But there's one thing you never taught me, Doc continued. You never taught me how to let people in. The smile faded from Carson's face. Doc's voice softened. Tuesday, in your dressing room, you showed me something you've been carrying. And you made me promise not to tell anyone. He paused. I'm about to break that promise. And I need you to forgive me for it. Carson's jaw tightened. The color drained from his face. He glanced at Ed McMahon, no help there. He looked at the cameras, still rolling. He was trapped. On live television. With nowhere to hide. Doc pulled a letter from the envelope in his hands. Not Carson's letter. His own. This is a letter my father wrote me before he died. I've never shown it to anyone. Not my wife. Not my kids. Nobody. His hands trembled slightly. I kept it hidden because I thought that's what you're supposed to do with pain. Lock it away. Keep moving. Don't burden other people with it. The audience was dead silent. Even the crew in the rafters had stopped moving. But watching you this week, Doc said, voice thick with emotion. Carrying your son's letter in your pocket, smiling through the hurt. I realize we're both doing the same thing. We're both pretending that strength means suffering alone. Carson's eyes glistened. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Doc took a step closer. You told me Rick wrote that he was proud of you. That he forgave you. Doc's voice cracked. Johnny, he didn't need to forgive you for anything. You were a great father. You just worked in a job that demanded everything from you. And he understood that. He said so in that letter. A tear rolled down Johnny Carson's face. On camera. In front of millions. The man who'd built an empire on never breaking character was breaking. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Doc set his letter on Carson's desk and reached into his jacket one more time. He pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. Different from the envelope. Older. More worn. You asked me not to tell anyone about what you showed me. And I didn't. But what I'm about to do isn't telling, it's sharing. He unfolded the paper. It was a photocopy. A photocopy of Rick Carson's letter. Carson's eyes went wide. Doc, how did you? You left it on the couch in your dressing room Tuesday, Doc said gently. I made a copy before you came back. I'm sorry. But I needed you to see that you're not the only one carrying this. He held up the photocopy so the cameras couldn't see the words. This was for Johnny, not for America. Your son wrote, Dad, I know you think you missed too much. But you were always there when it mattered. And I'm proud to be your son. Johnny Carson broke. Completely. He put his face in his hands and wept. Not quiet tears. Deep, guttural sobs. The kind of crying that comes from years of holding everything in. Ed McMahon stood up, hand over his mouth, tears streaming down his own face. The audience sat frozen, many of them crying too. Doc walked around the desk and put his hand on Carson's shoulder. You've spent 30 years making us laugh, he said quietly, but the microphones caught every word. Let us sit with you while you cry. For 2 full minutes, Studio 6B sat in silence as Johnny Carson grieved his son on live television. No commercials. No cuts. Just raw, human pain witnessed by millions. Then, slowly, Carson looked up. His face was red, his eyes swollen. He looked at Document. And he did something nobody expected. He smiled. Not a comedian's smile. Not a performer's smile. A real smile. The smile of a man who just put down a weight he'd been carrying for too long. You son of a bitch, Carson said, voice hoarse but warm. You broke your promise. I did, Doc said, smiling through his own tears. And I'd do it again. Carson stood up, walked around his desk, and hugged Doc Severinsen in the middle of the stage. The audience erupted. Not applause, something deeper. A collective release. 200 people standing, crying, clapping, bearing witness to what it looks like when 2 men choose vulnerability over performance. The band, without any cue, started playing softly. A gentle, slow melody. Something Doc had written years ago but never played on the show. Something he'd been saving. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Carson and Doc stood there, in the middle of the stage, holding that embrace while the music played. Then Carson pulled back, wiped his eyes, and looked directly into the camera. For the first time in 3 decades, he spoke to America not as Johnny Carson the host, but as John William Carson the father. My son Rick died 2 years ago, he said, voice steady but soft. And I never talked about it. Not here. Not anywhere. Because I thought that's what you do. You keep it private. You keep it together. He paused. But Doc just taught me something. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let people see you fall apart. The silence in the studio was reverent. Rick wrote me a letter before he died. Carson continued. And I've been carrying it like a secret. Like something shameful. But it's not. It's a gift. He looked at Document. And my friend here just gave me another gift. He showed me I don't have to carry it alone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the original letter. Held it up. This is the last thing my son ever wrote to me. And instead of hiding it, I want to share one line. Just one. He unfolded it carefully. His hands shook. Dad, the world knows you as the funniest man alive. I just know you as my dad. And that's enough. The audience broke again. Tears. Applause. A standing ovation that lasted 5 full minutes. Carson stood there, letting it wash over him, the letter still in his hand. When the applause finally died down, Carson folded the letter, put it back in his pocket, and turned to Document. Thank you, he said simply. Doc nodded. Any time, Johnny. Carson walked back to his desk, sat down, and looked into the camera. "We'll be right back," he said. Then he smiled, genuine, exhausted, free. "If I can pull myself together." The cameras cut to commercial. But in Studio 6B, something had shifted. The crew was crying. The audience was hugging strangers. Ed McMahon walked over to the desk and squeezed Carson's shoulder without saying a word. And Doc Severinsen stood with his band, trumpet still in hand, knowing he'd just done the most important thing he'd ever done on that stage. Not play music. Not make people laugh. He'd made his friend feel less alone. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The rest of that episode never aired in its original form. NBC cut the segment down, edited out most of the crying, and replaced it with a standard musical number for syndication. But everyone who was in Studio 6B that night remembered. And in the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. Letters poured into NBC. Thousands of them. People writing to thank Johnny for sharing his grief. People writing about their own losses. Parents who'd lost children. Children who'd lost parents. All of them saying the same thing. "You made me feel less alone." Carson read every single one. And he kept Rick's letter in his pocket for the rest of his life. Not as a secret anymore. As a reminder that the strongest thing you can do is let people see your heart break, and let them help you put it back together. Doc Severinsen's trumpet still hangs in Studio 6B. Next to it, in a small glass frame, is a handwritten note. "Thanks for breaking your promise. JC. Some rules are made to be broken. Especially the ones that keep us from being human."